Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in favor of my amendment, which would prohibit federal funding for the Countering Group Extremist Activity Working or implement any recommendations from the group. In 2021, Democrats and the Biden regime unjustly used January 6th to prop up this woke working group to provide cover for unjustly targeting members of our military. The so-called Countering Group Extremist Activity Working has been weaponized and implemented to almost exclusively target Republicans, conservatives, and libertarians serving in the military. And yet, by its own metrics, it has been a massive waste of money and time. The Defense Department continues to spend large amounts of time and money to combat extremism, yet its own analysis of the situation shows that it's entirely unnecessary. In fact, fewer than 100 service members have been subject to the discipline due to engagement in extremist activities. That's only 0.005% of the approximately 2.1 million active and reserve personnel. Clearly, extremism is not the problem that my colleagues on the left and media outlets made it out to be. The United States military is tasked with one mission: maintaining mission-critical readiness to protect the American homeland. Sowing our armed forces with divisive rhetoric designed to pit races and genders against one another is not only morally wrong, it poses a very real threat to our national security. Under the Biden regime, DEI instruction and management has reached new heights that threaten to weaken the bond between America's armed forces and its civilian leadership, and undermine our military effectiveness and readiness. All of our men and women in uniform deserve to have the best tools needed to carry out their mission to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Unfortunately, liberal ideology undermines this mission. In order to stand up to China, Russia, terrorists, our military needs to project strength, not cultural wokeness. My amendment does exactly that. I urge the adoption of this amendment. Mr. Chair, I reserve.
Colorado reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Hawaii seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I claim time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Chair, to be clear, January 6th was an attack on America, our democracy, and this institution which we have all taken an oath to serve. This shouldn't be controversial, but service members who swear an oath to the Constitution should not try to overthrow the United States government. Yet the latest report from the Department of Defense Inspector General found that 78 service members were alleged to have advocated for the overthrow of the government in the past year alone. That is likely an undercount given reported challenges in gathering and compiling data across the military departments. Clearly, extremism in the military remains a persistent and serious issue, one that we should not take lightly, again, given the January 6th insurrection in which we know some service members and veterans participated. This fact alone should be deeply concerning to every single one of us in this chamber. Instead of taking this problem seriously, this amendment prohibits the Department of Defense from implementing recommendations designed to counter extremist activity in our military. This undermines unit cohesion, the readiness of our forces, and ultimately public trust in our military. My colleagues allege that the department's efforts to counter extremist activities unfairly targets conservatives. There's nothing in the Countering Extremist Activity Working Group's final report to substantiate that allegation, because violent extremism, regardless of its political or partisan leaning, is a danger to all of us and to this democracy. But there can be no denial that far-right extremism is surging across the country at a much higher level than that of left-wing extremism. A recent study showed that violent extremist acts in the United States were far more likely to be associated with far-right ideologies like white supremacy than for any far-left alternative. In fact, the level of violence perpetrated by right-wing extremists in this country is on par with, if not higher than, that of Islamist extremists. In our country, where service members have access to critical national security information and assets, individuals motivated by extremist ideologies can pose an outside threat to our national security when they move beyond fair and legal expression of contentious issues and into subversive or even violent actions. Tackling extremism in our military is not about promoting wokeness, which my colleagues continue to be obsessed about. It's about protecting our people and our country. And that, sadly, also means preventing domestic terrorism and addressing the serious and persistent threat to our homeland. And is also about restoring public confidence and trust in one of the most important institutions in our history and society. I urge my colleagues to reject this dangerous amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Generally reserves. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate quickly that this is fewer than 100 service members who have been targeted here, and that's only 0.005% of the approximately 2.1 million active and reserve personnel serving. Ultimately, wokeness, it weakens our military. Violent left-wing extremists stormed the field yesterday at the congressional baseball game. And in 2020, they burned down our cities. They say that we're obsessed with wokeness. They're obsessed with January 6th, which their speaker admitted that she did not have our facility properly secured. And Mr. Chair, I would like to yield the remainder of my time to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Corey Mills.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I just want to point out once again, as a United States Army combat veteran, I had served with people from different race, creeds, genders. None of that mattered. We all bled green. When we went to Iraq, we went to Afghanistan, we were sitting in Kosovo. Not once did we talk about who did you vote for, what religion do you follow, what gender do you identify as. We were a cohesive unit that believed in service. And I think that the DEI, which was actually passed in last year's NDAA in the House, should actually show that we're ready to close this because it's caused division, not inclusion. I think that we were a much stronger military with the greater recruitment efforts when you talk about the 41,000 deficit that we're seeing today, when we were prioritizing the ideas of coming together, fighting a common enemy, training as one. This is what mattered to our United States military when we strengthened ourselves, not the ideas of trying to identify ourselves as being something different, but as being one. That's what the military that I served in, that's what the military I believe in, and we need to stop allowing our militaries to only think about serving political agendas and get back to what they're supposed to do, which is serving our country. I've seen nothing but division through DEI. And one of those examples that we talk about is that we want to try and make sure everyone has a right to their own opinions. But the reality is that Tyler Boyer had a turning point event where military members attended and were actually refused to go because of being conservatives.
Gentleman's time has expired.
We need to be a stronger military. I support this amendment. I ask our colleagues to do the same.
I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Hawaii is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself as much time as is remaining.
Lady is recognized.
Thank you. As we previously heard, first of all, let's be clear here. We are not talking about DEI, which once again, this is an obsession of the far right in this particular body. And I would agree with you, though, in that same context of that conversation. I think we are in agreement. This is about how we should serve as one united nation. How do we serve as the United States of America as a whole? The bottom line is when we take a look at the kinds of extremist activity that is happening within our military that was found by the Countering Extremist Activity Working Group, this is not bringing our country together. This is not allowing us to stand under one common flag. A 2020 Military Times poll found that more than half of minority service members of color, say they have personally witnessed examples of white nationalism or ideologically driven racism within the ranks. And as we can recall, in June 2020, a service member of the 173rd Airborne Brigade with white supremacist leanings lead classified troop movements to facilitate an attack on his own unit while deployed to Turkey. Let's be clear here. The recommendations of the Countering Extremist Activity Working Group are not controversial. They include enhancing insider threat analysis and response, developing comprehensive training and education for departmental leadership, providing notice to personnel on prohibitive activities, and improving internal information sharing and coordination. I think we can all agree in this body, no matter what side of the aisle you sit on, this is good for us if we are truly trying to stand up to China, to Russia, and North Korea. How do we make ourselves truly a United States Department of Defense, not one that is currently divided by internal rifts, internal extremism that sadly we are seeing too often in the field and in our ranks. So with that, Mr. Chair, I strongly encourage all of our colleagues to vote against this amendment and to make sure that we can, in fact, be a strong, united president standing against our adversaries across the globe. I yield back.